She fell from the sky in a burning wreck of alien metal and shredded pride, a queen broken not by war, but by betrayal. He found her in the smoldering crater that used to be a warship, her blue skin torn, her armor blackened, and her pulse hanging on the edge of silence. He should have walked away. He didn't. He carried her. The orders were clear: no interaction with alien factions. The Terran Border Code spelled it out in 7 languages. Aid only when officially sanctioned. But her eyes weren't covered in bureaucracy. Her blood wasn't made of rules. She was dying. And he was still human. He pulled her from the wreckage, ignoring the hiss of molten alloy burning his boots. She weighed almost nothing, her bones lighter than any Earthborn's, her body trembling in the fading light. Her crown, half melted into her temple, clung to her like guilt. He should have reported it. Instead, he wrapped her in his emergency cloak, triggered the beacon jammer, and disappeared into the canyons like a ghost with a secret. Her name came later, whispered through cracked lips 3 days after she stabilized. Sorrentha Velari, High Queen of the Ilari warclan. Last of her line. First to bleed for a rebellion that had stabbed her from within. She hadn't expected to survive. He hadn't expected her to smile when she saw him again. The first week was about healing. He brought her food from ration packs she couldn't stomach, bandaged wounds that refused to close, and filtered water from toxic streams. She spoke in fragments, of ambushes, assassins, and a sister who should have taken the throne but took her army instead. He didn't ask for her story. She gave it anyway between spasms of pain and sleep. The second week, she walked. Her people had engineered their kind to fight in gravity far weaker than Earth. Every step was war. She refused help. Pride, he thought. Trauma, he realized. She had commanded legions. Now, she leaned on a rusted staff and vomited after every 4th step. He never once called her weak. She never once asked him why he stayed. The comms crackled twice, once with a search drone's sweep, once with a command ping from orbital. He buried the signals under decoy bursts and left the transponder fried. Officially, he was scouting radiation zones. Unofficially, he was now a deserter harboring a fugitive monarch. Unforgivable on every account. But he didn't care. She told him about the child on the 9th night. It wasn't framed as a confession. It came out like a reflex, a truth too heavy to keep. The betrayal wasn't just political, it was maternal. Her child, heir to the throne, had been the target. She had faked her death, escaped through an unshielded jump vector, and sacrificed her escort to cover the exit. The shuttle they found her in was a decoy. The child was somewhere else safe. She wouldn't say where. He listened. Said nothing. She saw the judgment in his eyes and smiled anyway. I didn't expect mercy from a Terran, she said. I wasn't trained for royalty, he replied. The 3rd week, she stopped limping. They moved together now, silent across mountain passes and forest ravines. He taught her how to hunt local wildlife. She taught him how to sense orbital scanners before they swept overhead. He asked questions he shouldn't. She answered with truths that hurt. The Ilari Empire was gone. Humanity had survived because it had been underestimated. Her people had broken on their own hubris. Earth's resilience terrified what was left of the stars. When a drone patrol came within a kilometer, she volunteered to draw it away. He said no. She said it wasn't his choice. He tackled her mid-sentence, held her to the dirt, and whispered through clenched teeth that she wasn't dying on his watch. She didn't argue again after that. On the 20th night, under the ruins of an old observation dome, she kissed him. Not with fire, but with weight, the weight of survival, gratitude, and the terrible freedom that comes with knowing you're already dead in the eyes of your world. He didn't pull away. He was Terran Defense Corps. She was a dethroned alien queen. It didn't matter anymore. The galaxy was breaking apart at the seams, and somewhere in the void, her child carried a legacy that made both of them targets. But in that moment there were no empires, no fleets, no protocol, Just a scarred woman and the man who wouldn't let her die. In the morning, they fought. Not with fists or weapons, but with silence. He had sent a signal. Not to the Corps. Not to the fleet. To someone else. A human outpost. Unauthorized, underground, unofficial. He told her they could hide there. She called it cowardice. He said it was protection. She said she didn't need saving. He told her about Earth. Not the version in textbooks, but the real one, burned, rebuilt, chaotic, stubborn. A planet that bled itself dry before finding purpose again. A world that had been stepped on by giants and decided to punch back. He said if her child was to live, it needed to know what humanity was. Not peace. Not diplomacy. Survival. Sacrifice. Tenacity. She listened. Said nothing. When the dropship arrived, she was gone. He searched for 2 days, cursing every step. When he found her, she was standing in a clearing with a blade pressed to the throat of a bounty tracker. The man was half dead, strung up like a warning. She didn't speak until he approached. "You lied," she said. "I said we'd be safe. You said you wouldn't choose for me. I didn't. I gave you a door. You walked through it or you don't." She dropped the blade. The tracker gasped. She didn't. "Then lead," she said. They reached the outpost 3 days later. No parades. No banners. Just dust, steel, and humans too tired to ask questions. She collapsed that night. The medic said she was stable. He stayed at her side, hand on the pulse that now beat in time with his own. The child's location was never disclosed. He didn't ask again. She never brought it up. But she stayed. Not as a queen, but as something harder to define. She trained with the Terrans, ate with them, bled with them, and one day, in a room no bigger than a weapons locker, she whispered that she was carrying again. He didn't speak, just nodded, held her hand like it was a vow. And in that silence something shifted, not between them, but around them. The galaxy had moved on. Empires had fallen. But something old and defiant had survived, something raw, honest, human. And whatever child came from that, the stars weren't ready. Not for another queen. And definitely not for a human-raised one. She woke up in a different world. Not one made of steel and command, but of rust and defiance. The Terran outpost wasn't built for royalty. It barely qualified as shelter. But within its walls were people who didn't flinch at scars, who didn't ask what she used to be. They handed her a shovel, a training vest, and silence. She respected that more than any throne room. He was different here. Less guarded. Still disciplined, but with a looseness that came from no longer pretending. They trained side by side. She learned the recoil of Terran rifles, the grind of bone against sand in unfiltered wind. The way human combat wasn't about elegance, it was about lasting longer than the other person could think. The medics didn't ask about the child growing inside her. She didn't offer it. The pregnancy was a private rebellion in a galaxy obsessed with bloodlines and dynasties. She trained harder than anyone expected. She bled from knuckles, not from battlefields. No one coddled her, and she never asked for it. 3 weeks into their arrival, the first signal came. A coded pulse from deep space, encrypted in the old Ilari military tongue. Only a handful would recognize it. Fewer could trace it. She felt it in her bones before the console even lit up. The sister she had trusted once was still looking. Not for reunion. For confirmation she was dead. She didn't tell him. Not immediately. Instead, she tested the outpost's defenses. Measured the loyalty of the people around her. Asked questions she already knew the answers to. The humans here weren't like the others. They weren't military by rank, but by decision. They followed not orders but survival. And they knew what it meant to harbor a threat larger than themselves. When she finally told him, he didn't flinch. He just nodded. Said, "Then we stay ready." Her sister's ships would find them eventually. The signal hadn't been random. It was a probe. A whisper in the dark to see who would whisper back. She sent a reply, one that mimicked the pulse but reversed the vector. A lie clean and sharp. If they traced it, it would lead them to an abandoned war field in the Helix Rim. Then she waited. The outpost changed around her. People stopped seeing her as a guest. She became a presence, a trainer, a tactician. They didn't salute her, but they moved when she spoke. Her strategies weren't human, but they worked. She showed them how to strike without committing, how to read fleet movements from transmission shadows. The humans soaked it up without pride. They were practical, efficient, dangerous in the way only desperate people can be. He watched her shift, from survivor to commander, from foreign to one of them. And somewhere in the middle of that transformation, they stopped hiding what they were. Not just allies, not just lovers, partners. Two people who had bled in the same dust, chosen the same defiance, and now carried something far bigger than either of them had planned. She had nightmares sometimes, of the palace burning, of her people screaming her name not in loyalty, but accusation. He never woke her. He just stayed beside her, hands steady, breathing slow. In the morning, she never mentioned them. But she trained harder on those days. 6 weeks in, a satellite crashed on the perimeter. Not human. Not hers. A design she hadn't seen before, sleek, quiet, and almost surgical in its deployment. They disassembled it piece by piece, logged the data. The code was synthetic. No signature. No Empire stamp. Just silence and precision. She analyzed the broadcast and found something chilling. It was scanning DNA. Not species. Individuals. Someone wasn't just looking for life. They were looking for her. She made a decision then. She wouldn't run again. She convened the Outposts Council, informal, made up of the most trusted survivors and engineers. She laid everything out. Her lineage. Her rebellion. The child. The threat. She gave them the choice to turn her in. To hand her over in exchange for peace. Not a single one moved. "We don't trade family," someone muttered. That's when she knew Earth was more than dirt and steel. It was an idea. A brutal, battered idea that no longer feared extinction. And she could build something from that. She sent out a second signal. This time, not a deception. A message to old allies, Ilari defectors, remnants of her guard, deserters who had vanished into exile. She told them the truth. No orders. No demands. Just one phrase. Still alive. Still fighting. A few responded. The first to arrive wasn't Ilari. It was human, an ex-fleet captain turned mercenary. She didn't recognize his name, but he recognized hers. Said he owed her for sparing his colony during the border wars. His ship was patched together with scrap and madness, but it flew. And more importantly, it carried weapons. The second was an Ilari. Old, scarred. Eyes burned shut from plasma. She had trained him when he was nothing but a cadet. Now, he bowed without ceremony and handed her a piece of her old war banner. Burned on one edge, still crimson on the other. They started coming in ones and twos. Never enough to call it an army, but enough to prove she wasn't forgotten. She reorganized the outpost's perimeter. Buried satellites, rewired comms, converted mining gear into artillery, taught farmers how to stab at the weak points of armor. These weren't soldiers. But they learned fast. He watched all of it with grim pride. And when she was alone, he reminded her, this wasn't just about revenge. It was about what came after. She agreed. Not in words. In action. They built a nursery inside the old medbay. Reinforced. Shielded. She placed one guard there at all times, armed and silent. Not because the baby was special, but because it was innocent. And innocence was now the most endangered resource in the galaxy. The real war started without warning. 3 ships dropped from orbit, stealth class, heavy runners, no flags. No hails. Just heat signatures and power buildup. She didn't panic. She smiled. They're not here to negotiate, she said. No one ran. No one surrendered. They activated the defense protocols she'd designed, scrambled fighters she had retrained, and engaged. The fight was short, brutal, precise. They lost people. Not many, but enough. The Terrans retaliated with a fury that shocked even her. These weren't soldiers. They were survivors defending what was theirs. And that made them worse than any army. The wreckage of the attackers was unmarked. No Empire insignia. No black box. But she recognized the energy core design. It was Ilari. Her sister had sent them. She knew then that there would be no peace. Not until one of them was dead. She made her choice. And for the first time in months she wept, not for loss but for resolve. He held her that night, not as a soldier, but as the father of what came next. And in the silence between their breaths, they made a promise that echoed louder than any vow. If the stars wanted war again, then this time, they'd bring it to the stars. The funeral pyres burned low. The smoke had barely faded before the next phase began. She stood in the command chamber they'd hollowed from the bones of an old mining rig, eyes tracing the holographic star map, where red dots glowed like a plague across known space. Her sister wasn't just reacting anymore. She was hunting. Entire sectors were being cleared, not for conquest, but for silence. Anyone who once wore Sorrentha's crest or whispered her name in loyalty had disappeared. She had once believed there was still a sliver of diplomacy left in her bloodline. That illusion died with the second wave of attack. They came with decoys, planet killers, and precision. They avoided open conflict, targeting infrastructure, communication, food lines. It was an extermination dressed in strategy. No declarations, no propaganda, just cold, calculated erasure. The message was clear: surrender or vanish. Sorrentha chose neither. The outpost wasn't hidden anymore. It had become a rallying point, a rumor, a myth wrapped in defiance. Old alliances began to whisper back. Not with fleets, but with ships just good enough to fly and soldiers barely healed from the last war. Each arrival brought fragments, supplies, knowledge, pain. They weren't united by culture or history. Only by one truth. The galaxy's oldest powers were collapsing under their own rot, and the only ones who still fought were those with nothing left to lose. The humans didn't flinch. The child growing inside her was no longer just a symbol, it was the heartbeat of something new. The father never left her side, not out of duty, but belief. Every time he walked past the war room and saw names of the dead etched into the steel, he pressed his hand to them, remembered them, and moved forward without a word. Sorrentha began targeting her sister's network. Not directly. She seeded misinformation, rerouted convoys into ambush zones, triggered rebellions on planets where loyalty had thinned. Precision work. The kind that didn't need armies, just a few angry minds and good timing. The effect was exponential. Like sparks in dry grass. Her sister's reach was vast, but it cracked under the weight of having to control everything. Each act of sabotage didn't just wound, it embarrassed. Her enemies began to panic. Earth didn't send aid officially. But aid came. Old war freighters with no IDs. Smugglers turned patriots. AI-guided rail cannons that had never existed on paper. Someone high up was pretending to look the other way. She never asked who. She didn't care. The galaxy was tired of empires. Humanity had simply learned to profit from the fallout. When the assassination attempt came, it failed not because of security, but because the child inside her shifted at just the right moment. The blade meant for her heart missed by inches. The assassin died quietly, without torture or trial. That was the law in the outpost now. No mercy for those who brought poison. After that, she moved underground. Not in fear, but in preparation. She constructed a mobile command platform beneath the surface, linked through fiber and subspace. Redundant systems, self-sealing bulkheads, fallback zones mapped to the centimeter. She was done reacting. It was time to shape the battlefield. Word came through a resistance channel. Her sister's flagship would dock at a trade summit orbiting Yuvan 4. No escorts. No grand announcements. A display of dominance. A trap if she ever saw one. But traps work both ways. She didn't take a fleet. Just 3 stealth ships. 8 personnel. 1 objective. The plan wasn't to kill her sister. It was to fracture her support in front of witnesses. They sliced through the perimeter net, bypassed sensor arrays using old diplomatic code. Her personal entrance into the summit was timed to the second. She walked into the great hall unarmed, armor stripped of insignia, cloak soaked in the mud of her outpost. Eyes turned. Her sister froze. The room didn't erupt in violence. It held its breath. Sorrentha didn't accuse. She recited facts, crimes, evidence, survivor testimonies, ship IDs, battle timestamps, locations scrubbed from Imperial logs but still buried in black box cores. She laid it bare with clinical detachment. Her sister laughed. Denial, fury, then threat. But something broke. A subtle shift in the crowd. Fear. Doubt. Some had long suspected what Sorrentha claimed. Now they heard it from the one they thought was dead. She walked out unharmed, not because they let her, but because no one had the nerve to stop her. The days after were chaos. Half her sister's fleet went dark. 2 generals defected. Supply lines collapsed. And for the first time, Sorrentha's people called her queen again. But this time, not with ceremony. With grit. She rejected the title. "I'm done with crowns," she told her people. "But I'll carry the fight." Her child was born in a bunker 3 weeks later. No royal court. No medics from the stars. Just blood, silence, and the steady grip of the man who refused to leave. The baby came screaming, fists clenched, lungs filled with rebellion. Blue-skinned, but eyes unmistakably human. The galaxy didn't stop spinning. The war didn't pause. But something irreversible had changed. The child was more than a symbol. She was proof that a Terran soldier and an alien queen could rewrite the future not through conquest, but defiance. That alliances could be forged not by treaties, but by shared scars. That the broken could still rebuild. Sorrentha returned to the command chamber within days. The baby remained close, always protected, never hidden. Enemies would come. Assassins would try. But the child would grow surrounded by people who knew how to fight and refused to kneel. More planets rose up. Not with declarations, but by refusing to send troops. Refusing to acknowledge the Empire's rule. Whole systems blacked out their identifiers. The stars were going dark on purpose. Not from fear. From solidarity. Her sister struck back in desperation. Civilian centers. Medical hubs. Places that had no military value. The rage of a crumbling tyrant. But the galaxy had changed its taste. And when the Terran-backed alliances moved, they didn't just retaliate. They absorbed. Fleet by fleet. Colony by colony. It wasn't a rebellion anymore. It was momentum. She didn't claim leadership. She didn't want it. What she wanted was something simpler. A network. A future. A place where no one had to be born into war just to survive it. The last broadcast she sent wasn't to her enemies. It was to the silent worlds. The quiet planets still pretending neutrality. "We are not asking you to fight," she said. "We're asking you to remember what it means to be more than ruled. What it means to choose." Her sister vanished 3 months later. No announcement. No fleet movement. Just silence. Some say she died. Others claim she went into exile. Sorrentha didn't chase her. She had nothing to prove anymore. The galaxy settled into something new. Not peace, but a kind of balance, built on ash and defiance. Sorrentha never took a throne. But they still called her queen. And when her daughter grew strong enough to walk, she carried her into the sunlight of the rebuilt outpost. Not as a ruler, as a mother. Because the war wasn't over. But the future finally had a name. And it wasn't fear. It was hope. Born from 2 people who refused to let the stars burn them into silence.